Welcome back, brave souls. Tonight I will take you to the remote valleys of the Utah Territory in 1847, where the wind carries secrets that no settler dares speak aloud. A man named Mr. Whitmore arrived from the east, a figure both respected and feared. He settled along the jagged cliffs and arid plains, a place where survival was harsh and the nights were darker than any you have ever imagined. Whitmore's reputation grew quickly, not just for his wealth, but for the unsettling air that followed him. Locals whispered of his 4 wives, each more mysterious than the last. They were never seen together in public, yet everyone knew they lived in the same sprawling cabin, a house built from timber so old it creaked like the groan of ghosts. Some claimed to hear soft, sorrowful cries from the windows at night. Others swore they saw shadowy figures moving inside, disappearing when approached. It was said that Whitmore had a particular fascination with secrecy. His wives, each with a different story, were drawn from far and wide. One came from the bustling streets of Boston, one from a quiet farm in Ohio, another from a wealthy family in Philadelphia, and the last, well, her origins were unknown, even to the neighbors. But all shared the same fear, a life under the roof of a man whose eyes never smiled, whose voice could charm and chill at the same time. The townsfolk tried to stay away from the Whitmore property, especially after dusk. Animals would howl without reason, and even the wind seemed to whisper warnings to any traveler daring to pass by. And yet some could not resist the curiosity. Who were these women? What was Whitmore hiding behind those shuttered windows? And what was the source of the strange lights flickering from the cabin at midnight, like candles in a storm? Tonight we begin to uncover the first of many unsettling truths. The first wife, young and timid, had started keeping a journal. Its pages spoke of unexplained shadows moving through the hallways, of voices that spoke to her when no one was near. Her writings hinted at rituals, secret doors, and a presence that seemed almost alive. Little did she know that these pages, if discovered, could spell doom for anyone who dared read them. Before we continue with the story and unspeakable secrets, I want to ask something important. This channel is not for everyone. Only the bravest souls who dare to confirm the darkest chapters of history. If you made it this far, you are not like most people. You understand some truths are too horrifying to ignore, no matter how much they disturb us. So hit that subscribe button and join our community of true mystery seekers. And tell me in the comments, what state are you listening from? Are you brave enough to hear a story like this from your own backyard? Next, we discover the first chilling encounter that would forever change the lives of Whitmore's wives and the valley itself. Disclaimer. This story is a complete work of fiction, inspired by historical settings only. Any resemblance to real events or families is purely coincidental. Section 2. Whispers in the cabin. The valley was quiet that night, almost unnaturally so, as if the land itself held its breath. Inside the Whitmore cabin, the first wife, Eliza from Boston, sat by the flickering fireplace, her hands trembling over the journal she had begun to keep. The flames danced shadows along the walls, elongating them into shapes that seemed to watch her. She thought she heard soft footsteps upstairs, but when she looked, the corridors were empty. Eliza wasn't the only one feeling unease. The other wives, Margaret from Ohio, Clara from Philadelphia, and the mysterious Anna, whose past was entirely unknown, had begun noticing strange occurrences as well. Doors would lock on their own, cupboards rattled as if something inside was moving, and sometimes in the dead of night a low, guttural hum echoed through the house, vibrating through the wooden floors. It was Whitmore who seemed untouched by these phenomena. Calm, composed, he would stride through the cabin as if nothing were wrong, yet his eyes betrayed a glint that made the wives shiver, a mixture of curiosity, control, and something far darker. One night, Eliza awoke to a whisper that seemed to come from nowhere, yet it was unmistakably calling her name. "Eliza," it breathed, soft and urgent. She followed the sound to the far corner of the parlor, where a small hidden door she had never noticed before stood slightly ajar. A foul metallic scent wafted from within, and the shadows behind it seemed to twitch like living creatures. She recoiled, unsure if she should call out for help or simply run. Something in her gut told her that crossing Whitmore in any way could invite unimaginable consequences. Days passed, and tension in the cabin grew unbearable. Margaret claimed she saw Clara speaking to someone in the night, yet when approached, Clara insisted she was alone. Anna, quiet and enigmatic, seemed to know more than she revealed. She would stare at Whitmore with a strange intensity, as if she were silently communicating with him, understanding things the others could not. And through it all, Whitmore's calm demeanor never faltered, his presence a constant reminder that the power in the house belonged to him, and perhaps to something far older, lurking just out of sight. The wives began to whisper among themselves, carefully, cautiously, knowing that one wrong word could awaken Whitmore's wrath. Yet fear could not stop curiosity. They had to understand the truth behind the shadows, the hidden doors, and the strange rituals Whitmore conducted in the dead of night. Each passing hour deepened their dread, but also drew them closer to secrets that were meant to remain buried forever. Next, we witness the first terrifying incident that leaves one of the wives questioning her very sanity, and the valley itself trembling with a dark presence. Section 3. The Vanishing of Margaret. It was a night like any other, or so it seemed. A bitter wind swept through the valley, rattling the wooden shutters of the Whitmore cabin. Eliza sat in her small room, her journal open, documenting every strange occurrence, every whispered word, every shadow that didn't belong. But tonight, the house seemed different, alive in a way that made her skin crawl. Margaret, the young wife from Ohio, had been unusually quiet since breakfast. She avoided the others, lingering in corners of the cabin that no one entered. Eliza had noticed her unease, the way her eyes darted toward the corners of rooms as if something, or someone, was watching. She called Margaret's name once, then twice, but the wife did not respond. A faint creak echoed from upstairs, followed by a soft thud, and Eliza's heart sank. Rushing to the staircase, she saw something that froze her blood. Margaret had vanished. No trace of her remained in the parlor, the hallways, or even the upstairs rooms. The windows were locked from the inside. Doors remained shut. It was as if she had simply disappeared. Panic gripped the other wives when they were alerted, and even Anna, usually composed and unreadable, whispered a word of warning. "He doesn't let anyone leave. Not alive." Whitmore, when confronted, remained unnervingly calm. His expression was unreadable, his eyes cold. "Margaret wandered off," he said simply. "She'll return when she is ready. Until then, leave her be." The wives wanted to scream, to demand answers, but his presence alone silenced them. Even the walls seemed to lean closer, listening, judging, ensuring that Whitmore's command was obeyed. That night, the house was filled with strange sounds, soft, scraping noises in the walls, as if something moved just out of reach. Candles flickered violently, shadows twisted unnaturally, and the wives heard what could only be described as muffled whispers echoing from the floors below. Eliza tried to convince herself it was her imagination, yet something deep inside knew the truth. Margaret was trapped somewhere in the cabin, in a place not meant for human eyes. As the hours passed, fear began to warp reality. Eliza swore she saw Margaret's reflection in the glass of the parlor windows, staring back with wide, terrified eyes. But when she turned, the room was empty. That night the wives realized something horrifying. Whitmore's house was not just a home. It was a trap, a labyrinth of secrets, and something older, darker, than any of them had imagined lingered within its walls. Next, we will uncover the hidden chamber that holds the answers to Margaret's disappearance, and the first terrifying ritual that Whitmore performs under the light of the full moon. Before we go deeper, understand this. This story isn't for everyone. If you're still here, you're one of the few who can face what America buried. Subscribe now, and tell me in the comments, what state are you listening from? And would you dare hear this story from your own backyard? Section 4. The Ritual in the Moonlight. The full moon rose over the jagged peaks of the Utah Territory, casting long, silver shadows across the Whitmore cabin. Inside, the air was thick and heavy, smelling faintly of burnt herbs and something far fouler, metallic, like iron mixed with decay. Eliza, unable to sleep, had crept toward the parlor, her candle flickering violently as if warning her to turn back. Through the slightly ajar door, she saw Whitmore, standing in the center of the main room. The other wives, Clara and Anna, stood silently at the corners, eyes downcast, their faces pale. And there, bound in strange ropes of woven cloth, was Margaret. She was awake, her eyes wide with terror, her lips trembling, whispering words too soft for Eliza to hear. But the sight was enough to make her stomach twist with dread. Whitmore began to chant in a language that was foreign, guttural, and ancient. The shadows on the walls seemed to crawl toward him, stretching, twisting, and sometimes flickering like living figures. Candles burned with unnatural blue flames, casting light that made the air itself shimmer. Eliza pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a scream. She wanted to flee, to intervene, but something held her in place. Something in the room told her that leaving now could bring consequences far worse than anything she had imagined. The ritual escalated. Whitmore's voice rose in a low, commanding tone. Margaret's eyes rolled back, her body twitching unnaturally, as if she were caught between two worlds. The rope seemed to pulse around her, tightening slightly with each word, and Eliza could swear she saw a shadow detach from the walls, coiling around the girl like a living thing. Anna shivered, muttering under her breath, yet she never looked at Whitmore directly. It was as if she were part of this dark ceremony, a silent accomplice who knew far more than she revealed. Time lost all meaning. The wind howled against the cabin, rattling the timbers and carrying with it voices from the valley below, screams, laughter, and whispers all mixed into a terrifying chorus. Whitmore lowered his arms, and for a moment everything went still. Margaret slumped, unconscious, and the shadows retreated back to the corners, leaving only the eerie glow of the candles. Whitmore's calm returned instantly, his eyes glinting in the moonlight as if nothing had happened. Eliza backed away slowly, heart hammering. She realized something chilling. This was not the first ritual, and it would not be the last. Whitmore's power over his wives and the valley itself was rooted in something older, darker, and utterly unnatural. And if the whispers were to be believed, those who witnessed his ceremonies too closely rarely lived to tell the tale. Next, we will uncover Anna's hidden knowledge and why Whitmore's fourth wife may hold the key to the valley's darkest secret, one that could change everything the others thought they knew about him. Section 5. Anna's Secret. The morning after the ritual, the Whitmore cabin felt heavier than ever. A strange silence had settled, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Margaret remained unconscious, her pale form lying on the floor, while Clara and Eliza exchanged glances full of unspoken fear. But it was Anna who drew their attention most. Her face calm, almost unreadable, yet her eyes carried a glint of knowing that made the others uneasy. Eliza approached her cautiously, trying to understand the mystery surrounding the quiet, enigmatic wife. "Anna, what do you know about him?" she whispered. Anna did not answer immediately. Instead, she traced her fingers along the edges of the ritual circle Whitmore had drawn the night before. There was a faint, lingering smell of burnt herbs and iron. Her movements were deliberate, almost reverent, and it was clear she understood the symbols in a way the others could not. Finally, Anna spoke, her voice low and steady. "Whitmore, he is not just a man, not fully. This valley, this house, it responds to him. He has touched something, older than any of us, older than time itself. And the rituals, they are not for him alone. They are for her." She looked toward Margaret, still unconscious, her words sending chills down Eliza's spine. "For her? For Margaret?" Eliza asked, dread tightening her chest. Anna nodded, her gaze unwavering. "Something he wants, and it will demand a price." The wives realized then that Anna had known more than she had let on all along. Perhaps she had even come here intentionally, drawn to Whitmore by secrets of her own. Eliza's mind raced. If Anna understood Whitmore's power, why hadn't she warned them? Was she an ally, or another prisoner, bound by fear and knowledge too dangerous to reveal? The house seemed to hum with a dark anticipation, as if it were alive and listening, sensing that the others were beginning to awaken to its true nature. Later that day, while the men were occupied with supplies outside, Anna quietly led Eliza to the cabin's basement, a place even the other wives had never entered. Dust covered the floor, cobwebs hung like curtains, and the air smelled of rot and damp stone. In the dim light, they discovered a hidden alcove lined with strange objects, carved figurines, dried herbs, and old manuscripts filled with cryptic symbols. Anna traced a symbol with her finger and whispered, "He learned this long before the valley had settlers. He binds what he can control, and no one escapes the bindings." Eliza shivered. The realization hit her like ice water. The danger was far greater than mere domestic cruelty. Whitmore's power was supernatural, rooted in things none of them could understand, and perhaps once touched by him, there was no return. Next, we will witness Whitmore's second ritual, one that pushes the wives to the brink and forces them to confront horrors they cannot unsee, and a truth about the valley that may haunt them forever.
Section 6. The Second Ritual. Night fell like a heavy curtain over the Whitmore cabin, and the valley outside seemed to shiver beneath the light of a pale, ghostly moon. Eliza and Clara huddled in their rooms, their nerves fraying with every creak of the old timber and gust of wind. Margaret still lay unconscious, the ropes that bound her from the previous night now loosened but eerily taut in a way that suggested invisible control, and once again Whitmore prepared for a ritual, one more terrifying than the first. In the main hall, Anna moved with deliberate grace, her eyes scanning the room and the symbols etched into the wooden floor. "Tonight," she whispered to Eliza as she passed, "he will call the shadows closer. Be ready, but do not be seen." The wives exchanged terrified glances. They had begun to understand that the house itself obeyed him, every creak, every flicker of candlelight, every whisper of wind seeming to carry his will. Whitmore began chanting again, low and resonant, his voice echoing unnaturally through the rafters. The shadows around the room deepened, curling and twisting like living serpents, their edges shimmering as though they were semi-formed creatures from another world. Margaret's body convulsed, but she did not cry out. Her movements were no longer her own. It was as if some dark force had claimed her, using her as a vessel for something beyond comprehension. Eliza watched, frozen, as the ritual unfolded. The shadows climbed the walls, meeting Whitmore's gaze in a silent, obedient acknowledgement of his command. Anna murmured in a language Eliza could barely understand, a protective spell perhaps, or maybe a plea. But Whitmore's focus was absolute. The room seemed to warp under his will. Even the flames bent toward him, casting grotesque shapes across the walls. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the tense silence. Margaret's eyes flew open, and for a terrifying moment, it seemed as though two beings occupied her body. The terrified girl Eliza knew, and something else, a presence dark and ancient, whispering secrets in a voice that made the hair on her arms stand on end. Eliza wanted to intervene, to rush forward, but Anna's hand gripped her arm with surprising strength. "Not yet," she hissed. "You cannot stop it. Not now." The ritual ended as abruptly as it began. Whitmore lowered his arms, the shadows retreating like obedient servants. Margaret slumped, exhausted but alive, though her eyes held a depth of fear that chilled the others. Whitmore looked at them all with that same unnerving calm, his faint smile hinting at satisfaction, at victory. "Do not speak of tonight," he said, his voice soft but final. "The valley has ears, and it does not forgive." Next, we will uncover the secret of the hidden valley beyond the cabin, a place where Whitmore draws power from forces older than the settlers themselves, and where the wives' fates are slowly entwined with something they may never escape. Section 7. The Hidden Valley. Days passed in uneasy silence. The wives stayed close together, each haunted by what they had witnessed in the cabin, each trying to process the terror that now seemed to pulse in the very walls around them. Margaret's recovery was slow. The shadows that had clung to her were gone, yet something in her gaze had shifted, a quiet awareness of horrors she could not speak of. Anna, ever watchful, finally spoke. "There is a place," she whispered one evening, "beyond the ridges behind the cabin, a valley no settler dares enter. That is where he draws his strength, and that is where the secrets of this house live." Curiosity mingled with dread. Eliza and Clara followed Anna that night, careful to avoid Whitmore, who slept deeply in the main hall, seemingly unaware or unconcerned of their departure. The path was narrow and treacherous, winding through jagged cliffs and rocky slopes. The moonlight guided them, casting eerie shapes across the land, shapes that seemed almost alive. Finally, they reached the hidden valley. The air was colder here, sharper, carrying a faint metallic scent that reminded Eliza of the rituals in the cabin. Strange formations of stone rose from the ground, arranged in patterns too precise to be natural. The ground was covered with dried herbs, bones, and strange carvings, marks older than any settlement in the territory. Anna traced one of the symbols, her finger trembling slightly. "These are bindings," she explained. "He calls to forces older than men, spirits tied to the land itself. They obey him, willingly or not, and they feed off fear." Eliza shuddered. The shadows that had haunted the cabin seemed weaker here, almost hesitant, as though confined by the valley's natural boundaries. Yet something about the place resonated, a dark energy that whispered promises of power but also threats, in voices too low to hear it clearly. "This is where he plans," Anna continued, her voice urgent, "where he draws his power to control the house, the wives, even the land around us. If we understand this, we might find a way to fight back." Eliza's heart raced. Could they really resist him? Could mere mortals challenge a man who commanded shadows and rituals older than the settlers themselves? For the first time, a spark of hope flickered among the wives. Knowledge of the valley meant understanding, and understanding might mean survival. But Anna's eyes held a warning. "We cannot linger. If he senses us here, the valley itself will rise against us." Next we will see the first attempt of defiance, one of the wives daring to act against Whitmore, and the terrifying consequences that follow when mortals challenge powers older than time. Section 8. The first act of defiance. The wives returned from the hidden valley with their minds racing and their hearts pounding. For the first time, a plan began to form. A whispered, dangerous idea that challenged everything Whitmore represented. Margaret, still pale but recovering, was the first to speak. "We cannot stay silent," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "He cannot hold us forever. There is a way to break the bindings, and we now know where his strength lies." Eliza and Clara nodded, their fear mingled with determination. Anna remained quiet, her gaze distant, calculating. She had warned them before that any misstep could bring death, but she did not stop them. "Then we act," she said softly. "But we must be careful. Even a shadow can betray us." That night, when Whitmore retired to his private chamber, the wives moved through the cabin like ghosts. They whispered to one another, checking each door, each symbol, each object that might give them an advantage. The air itself seemed charged, as though the house knew their intentions. The shadows flickered along the walls, stretching toward them, almost daring them to continue. Margaret, emboldened by Anna's guidance, attempted the first move. She retrieved a small bundle of herbs and a silver dagger Anna had shown her in the hidden valley. Carefully she traced the symbols Whitmore had used in the ritual on the floor of the parlor, reciting the protective words Anna had taught her. The air grew thick, almost suffocating, and the candle flames bent violently, casting monstrous shapes that seemed ready to strike. Suddenly, a chilling wind swept through the cabin. The doors slammed shut, and a guttural voice echoed, low and commanding. "Who dares?" Whitmore's voice was everywhere at once, and yet he appeared from the shadows, his eyes glowing faintly with a power beyond human understanding. The Wivvies froze, realizing they had been detected. The shadows themselves began to surge toward Margaret, twisting and writhing, hungry and threatening. Whitmore stepped closer, his calm smile unchanged, but the air around him quivered with menace. "You are bold," he said softly. "Perhaps too bold." His gaze locked on Margaret, and for a moment the room felt suspended in time. The house, the shadows, the very air seemed to bend to his will. But in that moment, a spark of defiance ignited in Margaret. She held the dagger steady, the herbs trembling in her other hand, and whispered the protective incantation. The shadows hesitated. Whitmore's expression flickered, the first sign of uncertainty the wives had ever seen. The room was electric with tension, the quiet before a storm that could destroy them all. Next, we will witness the terrifying confrontation that follows, the first real clash between Whitmore's power and the wives' courage, a battle that may determine who will survive the darkness within the cabin. Section 9. The Clash of Shadows. The air in the cabin had grown almost unbearable, thick with the weight of Whitmore's power. Candle flames twisted violently, casting grotesque, dancing shapes on the walls, while the shadows seemed to lunge at Margaret with teeth unseen but felt in the pit of her stomach. Eliza and Clara pressed against the walls, holding their breath, unable to intervene but unwilling to leave their friend to whatever force threatened her. Whitmore's voice, low and resonant, rolled through the room like distant thunder. "Do you think a mere woman can challenge me?" His eyes glimmered with an unnatural light, and the shadows obeyed every flicker of his gaze, coiling and twisting as if alive. The very air seemed to vibrate under his command, and the floorboards creaked as if the house itself was shifting toward him. Margaret, trembling but resolute, held the dagger and herbs tightly. She recited the protective incantation Anna had taught her, her voice rising above the hum of malevolent energy in the room. The shadows recoiled slightly as if uncertain, and for the first time Whitmore's perfect calm faltered. His lips curved into a thin, almost imperceptible frown, a human hint of surprise breaking through the centuries-old dominance he projected. Eliza, sensing a moment of vulnerability, stepped forward. Her hand shook as she added her voice to Margaret's, joining in the chant, and Clara followed suit. The air in the cabin crackled like lightning, and the shadows hissed and writhed, retreating from the combined will of the three wives. Even Anna, standing silently in the corner, nodded slightly, her expression grim but approving. Whitmore's figure remained immovable, but the power in the room had shifted. He extended a hand, and the shadows surged again, but Margaret, steady now, drew a circle with the dagger and herbs around herself and her feet. Ends. The shadows collided with the protective circle and shattered into flickers of smoke, their screams echoing in the corners of the cabin like the cries of lost souls. For a fleeting moment, the wives had forced a balance, a precarious stand against the man who seemed invincible. Whitmore's eyes met theirs, cold and calculating, but no longer untouchable. He stepped back slowly, a warning rather than a retreat. "This is only the beginning," he said, his voice low and icy. "You will learn. The valley always remembers, and it never forgives." The wives exhaled, hearts hammering, realizing that the battle for control of the cabin and their very lives was far from over. Whitmore's power was immense, but the spark of defiance had been lit, and it could not be extinguished so easily. Next, we will explore the first sign that the valley itself has taken notice of the wives' resistance and the terrifying consequences that await them outside the safety of the cabin walls. Section 10. The Valley Awakens. The morning after the first confrontation, the Whitmore cabin felt charged with an energy the wives could not name. Even the wind in the valley seemed different, carrying faint whispers that rustled through the trees and rattled the cabin shutters. Birds avoided the area entirely, and animals that ventured near fled in panic. Eliza, Margaret, and Clara felt it in their bones. The valley had noticed their defiance. Anna had warned them this could happen. "The land obeys him," she said quietly, "but it also remembers every disturbance, The valley is alive, and it does not forgive lightly. She had led them outside to see the first signs. The soil in certain patches seemed to writhe subtly, as if breathing, while the rocks bore strange fissures glowing faintly in the moonlight. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the cliffs, moving independently of the sun or moon. Margaret shivered. "Is it him?" she asked. "Or something else?" Anna's expression was grim. "It is both. Whitmore channels the valley's power, but the valley itself has its own will. You can sense it because you disturbed the balance. He will not forgive this intrusion, nor the defiance you dared." As the wives observed, the distant mountains seemed to ripple like waves frozen in time. Low moans echoed from unseen hollows, carrying a mix of grief, rage, and hunger. Eliza realized with a chill that the valley itself could harm them. Even if they survived Whitmore, they were not safe beyond the cabin. That night, as Whitmore slept in his private chamber, the wives noticed something new. A faint light rising from the valley floor, coalescing into a shape that resembled a living figure. It moved slowly, deliberately, toward the cabin. Anna whispered, "The valley tests you. Tonight you will see if your courage is enough, or if it is nothing against what controls this land." Elise, watching the eerie glow, felt both fear and resolve. For the first time, they understood that surviving Whitmore was only part of the challenge. To escape, they would have to outwit the valley itself and whatever ancient dark intelligence had allied with the man they had dared to oppose. Next, we will witness the first night the valley's influence enters the cabin, a creeping, malevolent force that blurs the line between the natural and supernatural and forces the wives to confront horrors beyond their imagination.
Did you know, in July 1847, a group of religious pioneers known as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, commonly called Mormons, arrived in what is now the Salt Lake Valley after being forced out of Illinois and Missouri due to persecution for their beliefs. This was the beginning of permanent settlement in the region. One of the most controversial practices associated with the early LDS community was polygamy, a marital arrangement where one man had more than one wife. While polygamy was practiced by some leaders and members, it was not publicly acknowledged until 1852, several years after the first settlements in Utah Territory. This practice became a major issue between the settlers and the U.S. government. Federal laws like the Morrill Anti-Bigamy Act of 1862 were passed to outlaw plural marriage in U.S. territories, and these tensions delayed Utah's statehood for decades. Utah did not become a state until 1896, after church leaders officially renounced plural marriage.
Section 11. The valley strikes. The night air was heavy, almost suffocating, as if the valley itself had pressed down on the Whitmore cabin. Inside, the wives huddled together, aware that the quiet whispers of the valley were no longer distant. They were here. The walls vibrated subtly, a low hum resonating through the floorboards, as if the very heart of the earth had awakened beneath them. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed from the parlor. Candles snuffed out in unison, plunging the cabin into near-complete darkness. Eliza felt a cold wind surge through the room, carrying the scent of iron and decay. Shadows moved with a life of their own, coiling and stretching along the walls like serpents ready to strike. Every instinct screamed at them to flee, yet the doors refused to open. The windows seemed sealed by an invisible force, and even the floor itself seemed unwilling to support their weight fully. Anna whispered urgently, "It knows you. The valley responds to defiance. You cannot fight it directly. You must survive its test." From the darkness, shapes emerged, faint, translucent forms rising from the corners of the room, indistinct but horrifyingly human in silhouette. They reached toward the wives, their presence pressing against minds and hearts, bringing visions of despair. Margaret's disappearance all over again, Clara being pulled into the shadows, Eliza trapped in an endless void. The air became thick, heavy with dread, as though the cabin had become a vessel for the valley's wrath. Whitmore appeared suddenly in the doorway, calm and commanding, a single candle illuminating his face. "The valley tests all who trespass," he said. It will strip you of fear, or crush you under it. Yet even he did not move toward them. It was the valley itself, the ancient power in the land that had come alive. The shadows shrieked, the air pulsed, and for the first time the wives understood that Whitmore's authority, terrifying as it was tied to this force, and that the valley could act on its own. Margaret, trembling but resolute, took Anna's hand. "We can't let it break us," she said. Eliza and Clara nodded, fear giving way to desperate courage. Together, they began to recite the protective words Anna had taught them, forming a circle around themselves. The shapes recoiled slightly, and the wind's shriek became a howl of frustration, as though the valley itself had never encountered resistance like this. The night dragged on, shadows pushing, winds screaming, whispers clawing at their minds. Yet, in the midst of terror, the wives realized a terrible truth. Surviving Whitmore was only one challenge. To escape the valley, to survive both the man and the land that obeyed him, they would have to understand secrets older than any of them had imagined, and confront powers that had lain dormant for centuries. Next, we will uncover a hidden relic deep within the valley, an artifact Whitmore depends on, and the first clue that the wives might turn the valley's power against him. Section 12. The Relic of Power. The sun barely pierced the jagged cliffs of the hidden valley, casting long, ominous shadows across the ground. Eliza, Margaret, Clara, and Anna had returned cautiously, hearts still pounding from the valley's first assault on the cabin. But Anna insisted they go deeper into the valley today, toward a place Whitmore never allowed anyone to see, the chamber where his greatest power resided. The path narrowed, flanked by gnarled trees and rocks that seemed almost carved by unseen hands. Strange symbols etched into stones glimmered faintly, resonating with a hum that made the hairs on their necks rise. Anna stopped suddenly, pointing to a hidden alcove in the cliffs. "Here," she whispered, "is what he relies on. Remove this, and his hold on the house, and perhaps even the valley, will weaken." Inside the alcove lay a small, blackened chest, covered in dust and etched with runes that seemed to crawl under the light. Eliza approached it cautiously, her hands trembling. The air smelled of iron and smoke, thick with the power that had flowed through Whitmore's rituals. Margaret, with Anna guiding her, traced the symbols carefully, whispering protective words. As the chest creaked open, they discovered the relic, a small obsidian orb, smooth and cold, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. The shadows around them seemed to hesitate, the air thick with anticipation. Anna explained, "This is the source of his strength. It connects him to the valley, to the shadows, and to forces that predate even the settlers. Without it, he is powerful, but not invincible." Eliza's stomach churned. "Can we use it against him?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Anna nodded. "Yes, but it is dangerous. The orb will fight anyone who touches it with intent. You will have to be precise, careful, and united. One mistake, and it will consume you as easily as it obeys him." The realization hit them like ice. They now held the key to their survival, but wielding it would require courage beyond anything they had imagined. The valley had already tested them. Whitmore had already tested them. Now it was their turn to challenge both the man and the ancient dark forces he had enslaved. As they hid the relic carefully and made their way back toward the cabin, the air trembled with a silent warning. The valley seemed to sense the shift, an unnatural stillness pressing down, as if the land itself was waiting, watching, calculating. Whitmore's power had limits, and for the first time, the wives glimpsed a chance to defy him. Next, we will see the first calculated move against Whitmore, the beginning of a plan that could either free them or doom them entirely, as the shadows grow restless and the house tightens its grip. Section 13. The First Strike. Night fell like a suffocating blanket over the Whitmore cabin. Inside, the wives moved with a silent urgency, their hearts hammering in unison. Margaret held the obsidian orb tightly, its faint pulse a chilling reminder of the dark power it contained. Eliza and Clara flanked her, while Anna's eyes darted to every shadow, every corner, as though reading the room's thoughts. Tonight, they would act. Whitmore sat in his study, oblivious, or so it seemed. The soft flicker of candlelight outlined his calm face, but beneath the surface, a subtle tension threaded his movements. He had felt the disturbance in the valley hours before, the shift in the shadows, yet he did not fully understand its source. That would soon change. The wives gathered in the parlour, forming a protective circle with the orb in the centre. Margaret began the chant Anna had taught them, her voice low but steady. The orb vibrated in response, as if alive, resisting their will even as it hummed with potential. Shadows from the corners began to stir, sensing the attempt to sever Whitmore's control. The air became electric, charged with unseen forces, and the candle flames twisted violently, casting monstrous, flickering shapes along the walls. Suddenly, Whitmore appeared in the doorway, his eyes glowing faintly with a power that seemed to seep from the very floorboards. "You dare?" he hissed, his voice slicing through the room like a knife. The shadows surged forward, coiling around the wives, seeking to crush them. But Anna, her hand steady, completed the final gesture of the protective circle. A blinding pulse of light erupted from the orb, and the shadows recoiled, shrieking as they dissolved into the corners. Whitmore's expression faltered for the first time. His control over the room wavered, and a flicker of rage passed across his calm features. He stepped forward, Siku, commanding the shadows once more, but the orb resisted, its dark energy rebelling against its master. The air itself seemed to crackle with tension, the cabin vibrating as if the house itself were caught in a battle between wills. Margaret held the orb higher, chanting louder, and the shadows shrank further. Whitmore's fury was palpable now, a dangerous storm contained within a single man. "You will regret this!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the rafters. Yet for the first time, the wives saw a hint of vulnerability in him. Breathless and trembling, they held their ground. They knew this was only the beginning. Whitmore's power was immense, but tonight had proven something vital. Even the oldest, darkest forces could be challenged, if one dared enough to act. Next, we will witness Whitmore's retaliation, more terrifying and personal than ever, as the house and valley itself rise against the wives in a demonstration of his wrath. Section 14. Whitmore's Wrath. The victory was brief. No sooner had the wives felt a spark of hope than the house itself seemed to awaken in anger. Doors slammed violently, windows rattled, and shadows stretched across the walls like living claws. Whitmore stood at the center of the parlor, his eyes glowing with a malevolent light, his voice low but thunderous. "You will learn," he hissed, "that defiance comes at a price." The shadows surged forward, no longer hesitant, now charged with the full force of the valley's power. They struck at the wives with terrifying precision, writhing like serpents and forming shapes that seemed to mock and threaten every movement. Eliza felt an icy hand grip her shoulder, but when she spun, nothing was there. The air pulsed with energy, thick and suffocating, making every breath a battle. Margaret clutched the obsidian orb desperately, its protective glow flickering as Whitmore drew the shadows back toward himself. Anna shouted, urging the others to maintain the circle, but the power of the valley, combined with Whitmore's will, pressed down relentlessly. The floorboards groaned, as if the house were alive, leaning toward him, aiding his assault. Every instinct told them to flee, but the orb anchored their courage, and the circle held, for now. Whitmore advanced slowly, a predator savoring the fear he cultivated. His presence alone seemed to warp the room. The shadows bent toward him, converging into grotesque forms that loomed over the wives. His voice became a chant, commanding not just the shadows, but the very air, the valley, and the unseen forces that had lain dormant for centuries. Each word drove a cold fear deeper into their hearts, yet also fueled their determination. "You think a trinket can free you?" he demanded, pointing toward the orb. The shadows surged in answer, curling and snapping, almost sentient in their hunger. The orb pulsed in response, resisting, its glow stronger as the wives focused their will. In that moment the balance shifted, just slightly, just enough to reveal that Whitmore's strength, though terrifying, was not absolute. The struggle continued, a battle of wills between the ancient power he commanded and the courage and defiance of the wives. The air crackled with electricity, The shadows screeched like tortured spirits, and the very walls seemed to close in, threatening to crush them. Next, we will uncover a shocking revelation about Whitmore's past, something even darker than his rituals, that explains why the valley obeys him and why the wives may hold the key to ending his terror forever. Section 15. The Dark Origin. The storm of shadows and whispers had quieted, leaving the cabin trembling and the wives exhausted but alive. The obsidian orb lay between them, pulsing faintly, as if acknowledging their courage. But their brief relief was shattered when Anna spoke, her voice cold and urgent. "You need to understand why he has this power," she said. "Whitmore's strength is not just his own. It comes from a past older than the valley itself, a pact made long before the first settlers arrived." She led them to the hidden alcove once more, where the walls were lined with ancient manuscripts. Dust-covered and fragile, the pages revealed Whitmore's lineage and the terrible bargain struck generations ago. Long before he arrived in Utah, Whitmore had been initiated into a secret society obsessed with dominion over both the physical and spiritual worlds. He had been taught to bind forces from the valley itself, to manipulate shadows, and to channel fear as a weapon. But the manuscripts revealed something darker still. Whitmore's family had discovered a way to transfer power between generations, not through knowledge, but through control of those they claimed as family. Wives, servants, even children could be bound into rituals that strengthened the lineage. The valley, with its ancient spirits, was willing to obey him because it had been bound long ago to the family line, the pact renewed with every generation. Eliza's hands trembled as she read. "That's why the house, the shadows, the valley itself answers him. It's all tied to his bloodline." Anna nodded grimly. "Exactly. But the relic, the obsidian orb, represents a fracture in that chain. If we can wield it correctly, we can sever his hold, not just over the house, but over the valley's dark spirits as well." Margaret swallowed hard. "So, we're not just fighting a man, we're fighting generations of power and a valley that's been bound to obey him." "Yes," Anna replied, "and that's why he is so dangerous. His wrath is centuries in the making, but it also means his strength is rooted, predictable, and vulnerable if we act with courage and precision." A heavy silence fell. The wives realized the enormity of what lay ahead. Whitmore's power was immense, the valley's spirits loyal and deadly, yet knowledge had shifted the balance slightly. For the first time, they could see a path, not an easy one, not a guaranteed one, but a path to resistance. Next, we will witness the first strategic move against Whitmore, a daring attempt to weaken his hold over the house itself, setting the stage for a dangerous confrontation that will test their courage to the absolute limit.
Section 16. The first calculated strike. Night had fallen once more over the jagged peaks surrounding the Whitmore cabin, and the valley was eerily silent. The air seemed to hum with anticipation, as if even the ancient spirits sensed that something was about to change. Inside the cabin, the wives gathered around the obsidian orb, their faces pale but determined. Anna spoke first. "This is it. The first step. We weaken his hold over the house itself tonight. If the shadows begin to falter even slightly, he will notice, but he won't be able to contain it entirely." Margaret, clutching the orb, nodded. "I'm ready. Whatever comes, we have to hold the circle. Do not break it, no matter what." Eliza and Clara exchanged a tense glance and stepped closer, joining hands to complete the protective circle. The ritual began. Margaret traced the symbols on the floor, murmuring the incantations Anna had taught her. The orb pulsed brighter, responding to her focus, its dark energy twisting and turning as if alive. For the first few moments, the shadows remained motionless, as though uncertain how to respond. Then, with a hiss, they surged forward, more aggressive, more desperate than ever before. Whitmore appeared suddenly in the doorway, his presence filling the room like a storm. "You dare!" His voice was low, commanding, and the shadows obeyed him instantly, writhing and snapping like vipers. Yet the orb resisted, its light pushing back against the darkness. Whitmore's hands rose, attempting to draw the shadows into a unified attack, but the relic's power interrupted the flow, fracturing his control. The cabin trembled violently. Candles exploded into flame, the walls groaned as if alive, and the floorboards cracked beneath the weight of unseen forces. The shadows screamed, a chilling chorus of rage and desperation, yet the wives held firm. Margaret's voice rose above the Chow's chanting louder, and the orb's light flared, pushing Whitmore's power back. For a brief, shocking moment, the balance shifted. The shadows faltered, the air grew lighter, and even Whitmore's calm, unshakable demeanor wavered. He staggered, a flash of anger and disbelief in his eyes. It was clear the wives had touched a weakness he had never expected them to find. Breathless, trembling yet resolute, the wives realized something vital. They could challenge him. They had struck the first blow, and though the battle was far from over, hope had been born amid the terror. Next, we will see Whitmore's vengeance escalate, a deadly confrontation that forces the wives to confront the limits of their courage and the terrifying consequences of challenging a man tied to forces older than time. Section 17. The Wrath Unleashed. The air inside the Whitmore cabin had grown impossibly heavy, charged with a malevolence that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. The first strike against Whitmore's power had not gone unnoticed. He stood in the doorway, eyes blazing with fury, his voice low and resonant, commanding every shadow in the room. "You think you can defy me?" he hissed. "You have no idea what you've awakened." The shadows surged forward like living serpents, more aggressive and intelligent than ever. They twisted and coiled around the wives, striking at their protective circle, gnashing unseen teeth and clawing at the air. The floor trembled violently, as though the house itself had become a living creature, joining its master's wrath. Candles exploded in flame, casting grotesque shapes on the walls, and the temperature plummeted, freezing the breath in the wives' lungs. Margaret held the obsidian orb tightly, chanting with a voice that trembled but refused to break. Eliza and Clara maintained the circle, their hands shaking, yet the connection between them and the relic formed a fragile barrier. Anna moved with precision, guiding the incantation and keeping the circle intact. Every second felt like an eternity, the room vibrating with the raw power of Whitmore's anger. Suddenly the shadows lunged with a coordinated force, attempting to shatter the circle. One massive tendril of darkness snatched at Margaret, pulling with inhuman strength. Eliza screamed, throwing herself into the line, breaking the grip and pushing it back just enough for Margaret to continue her chant. The orb pulsed brighter, resisting Whitmore's pull, the light almost painfully intense in the darkened room. Whitmore's calm composure cracked further. He stepped into the circle, his hands raised, trying to wrest control of the orb directly. "I built this house," he shouted, the shadows responding instantly, writhing around him like extensions of his will. "The valley obeys me, and so will you." But the wives did not falter. Together their voices rose, chanting over his commands, their determination feeding the relic's energy. For a moment, time seemed suspended. The shadows hesitated, recoiling slightly from the orb's light, the air quivering with the tension of two unstoppable forces colliding. Whitmore's eyes flashed with both rage and a hint of fear, the first sign of vulnerability he had ever shown. The cabin shook violently, and then the shadows wavered, splitting and retreating toward the corners, unwilling to confront the combined will of the wives and the orb. Breathless and shaking, the wives held the circle, realizing the magnitude of what they had done. Whitmore's wrath had been unleashed, yet they had survived, perhaps even weakened him. But the fight was far from over. They understood now that survival required more than courage. It required cunning, unity, and a willingness to face the valley's ancient darkness itself. Next, we will witness the wives uncover a secret path within the valley, a hidden route that could give them the advantage in their ultimate confrontation with Whitmore, but at unimaginable risk. Section 18. The Hidden Path. The valley had grown quiet, almost deceptively so, as the wives returned from the cabin to the jagged cliffs that concealed the secrets of the land. Anna led them to a narrow crevice, barely wide enough to pass through, obscured by shadows and overgrown brush. "This path," she whispered, "was known to Whitmore's ancestors long before he arrived. It leads to the heart of the valley, the source of the ancient power he channels. If we can reach it, we might finally have leverage against him. Eliza's heart pounded. The cliffs were treacherous, loose rocks shifting underfoot, and every step seemed to echo unnaturally. The valley seemed alive, watching, testing, and waiting. Strange whispers drifted through the narrow passage, voices of the past, warnings and threats intertwined. Margaret shivered, but gripped the obsidian orb tightly, its pulse a reassuring reminder that their courage, however fragile, could not fail now. As they pressed deeper into the crevice, the light from the moon above faded, replaced by an eerie luminescence emanating from moss-covered stones. Shadows clung unnaturally to the walls, moving independently, and the air grew colder with each step. Anna paused and pointed to a series of symbols etched into the rocks. "These marks," she said, "show the path to the heart. Follow carefully. One misstep, and the valley itself will strike." The wives proceeded cautiously, tracing each marking, whispering protective words to maintain their connection to the orb. Every sound seemed amplified, the rustle of leaves, the crack of a distant branch, the whisper of wind, reminding them that they were never truly alone. The valley's dark intelligence was everywhere, and even Whitmore could not be fully separated from its awareness. Finally, they emerged into a hidden basin at the valley's center. Strange stone pillars circled a natural pool of water, the surface reflecting the pale moonlight above like black glass. The orb pulsed with energy in Margaret's hands, responding to the ancient power that radiated from this place. Anna looked at the other wives, her expression both grave and determined. "Here," she said softly, "is where the final move must be made. The valley is strongest here, but so are we. If we act together, Whitmore's hold can be broken, or we can all be lost." The wives shared a tense, silent agreement. The final confrontation was imminent. The choice was clear. Face Whitmore and the valley's ancient forces directly, or be trapped forever in the darkness he controlled. Courage, unity, and the relic were their only weapons, and the stakes could not be higher. Next, we will witness the climactic showdown between Whitmore and the wives, the ultimate battle where every secret, every fear, and every ounce of courage is put to the test. Section 19. The Final Confrontation. The hidden basin at the heart of the valley pulsed with an unnatural energy, shadows twisting along the edges of the stone pillars like living serpents. The air was thick with the scent of earth and iron, and the quiet whispers of the valley carried a promise of judgment. Whitmore appeared suddenly at the rim of the basin, his figure illuminated by the orb's faint glow. His eyes burned with fury and ancient power, every movement commanding shadows that surged and coiled in anticipation. "You've come far," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally across the basin. "But this is where your defiance ends." The shadows surged, reaching like claws toward the wives. The ground trembled, splitting slightly beneath their feet, as if the valley itself sought to swallow them whole. Margaret raised the obsidian orb, chanting the protective incantations with a voice steadier than she knew she possessed. Eliza and Clara completed the circle, hands joined, adding their strength and focus to the ritual. Anna guided every motion, her voice calm and commanding, weaving together the old magic of the valley and the counterspells that could sever Whitmore's control. Whitmore stepped forward, his hands raised, the shadows bowing and twisting around him. "You think mere words can undo centuries of power?" he demanded, his voice both thunder and whisper. Yet the orb pulsed brighter, resisting him, its dark energy rebelling against its master. The shadows writhed in confusion, some recoiling, others flickering and dissolving into mist. The air crackled with energy as the final clash began. Whitmore lunged toward the wives, his presence warping the very space around them. But Margaret thrust the orb forward, and a pulse of blinding light erupted, forcing the shadows back and breaking their grip on the land itself. Whitmore screamed, a sound of rage and his belief, as the valley's dark forces began to turn against him. The stones beneath the pillars trembled and cracked, the air thick with raw, unbridled power, as if the valley itself were reclaiming control from centuries of bondage. Whitmore's form wavered, flickering like a shadow torn between worlds. With a final, guttural roar, he was pulled toward the heart of the valley, the orb's power and the wives' courage combining to sever his connection to both the house and the ancient spirits. The shadows collapsed in on themselves, dissolving into the earth, leaving silence in their wake. The wives collapsed to their knees, exhausted, trembling, yet alive. The orb's pulse slowed, returning to a faint heartbeat in Margaret's hands. Anna whispered, "It's done. For now. The valley is free, but it remembers. It will watch, and it will judge anyone who tries to claim its power again." The cabin, once a prison of shadows and fear, seemed quieter, lighter. The valley exhaled, the wind carrying a soft, almost approving sigh. The wives had survived the darkness, their courage and unity the key to breaking a cycle centuries in the making. Eliza, looking at her companions, realized the truth. Fear could be overcome. Power could be challenged. And even in the deepest shadows, courage could shine. The valley was still, the house silent, and the future uncertain. But for the first time, the wives knew they had the strength to face it. Together. Before we continue with any more secrets of the Whitmore legacy, remember, true courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to stand in its face. And sometimes the most terrifying places hold the keys to your survival.